work together, together be the team that we can be.
Stop it, throw it to the end zone for Robinson and a touchdown.
We come to practice, we practice hard. We take the people, we be optimistic, and we gonna win games, bro.
All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug Carmi Show. Our guest today from the Washington Post is our good buddy Sam Fortier. Sam, what's happening, man?
Doing well. Thank you guys for having me as always.
You know it is. Are you breathing now? Have you exhaled, Sam?
Yeah, so we're 5 days out from the draft, and took a couple days there right after, but because it was a real sprint, especially having the number 2 pick this year. But it's been good, guys, and obviously when you get a guy like Jayden Daniels, brings a lot of excitement to the city, and I'm really excited to see him get on the field and get started.
It's got to be nice to have an off season where we're doing Jayden Daniels or Drake May or JJ McCarthy and not who's the organization and where we're at on Capitol Hill. People don't seem to realize that, Sam, but it's true. Life's better when things aren't muddy.
I would push back a little bit on the Capitol Hill thing, because I'm locked in up there because they're trying to get this RFK bill passed in the Senate.
There
and
you
obviously, the stadium is an issue that I write a lot about, think a lot about. So I'm still locked in up there, but I would say that yes, anytime you're not dealing with a sale or a DEA raid or a investigation into workplace misconduct, like that is that's a better summer for sure.
Sam, one of the things that I heard from Matt Ryan had and after Quinn got there, when he got back, it felt like he had been traded to a new team. I think don't want to quote him exactly, but I think that Dotson had said something the same at the event this time. Back to the building, it felt totally different. Everything's changed. Take us through some of the things that you've noticed the most as far as the change in ownership and the new GM and all the things. It's been a wild process. What have you gleaned the most out of it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's always going to be like cosmetic changes, right? Like Dan Quinn put up a new slogan in the team meeting room: anyone, anytime, anywhere. There's going to be changes. The ping pong tables back in the locker room. Infamously, the locker room is shaken up because it used to be by position group. The offensive linemen's right when you walk in, the defensive linemen to their left. But now it's pretty mixed up. Defensive players are sitting next to offensive players, and so yeah, I mean, like it is a new energy in there. It's a new era, but as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, like these are all cosmetic changes that will get old real quick if you don't win. Like the name of the game. Like I look at the NFLPA report card with the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Ownership gets an F, facilities get an F, training room gets an F. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls because they have a Hall of Fame head coach and a Hall of Fame quarterback. So, like, it's funny to me, like, this stuff matters, right? Like, it does matter because if you're Josh Harris, you got to win on the edges. You got to get sports science. You got to get nutrition. You got to upgrade all of these different – you got to make people want to come to you when your facilities aren't great. So it is about winning on the edges, but at the same time, it's also pretty simple. Like, just get the best guy at the most important position, and you'll be okay.
Winning on the edges is the most analytical thing ever, but I hear it all the time, and that's where we got to get it right on the edges, where the money. You notice that he's got money and he's spending it, and Dan didn't. Just on those things you're talking about that make differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like there's this Twitter meme that I think is actually like pretty accurate, where it's like a bell curve, and like there's like a dumb guy at one end of the bell. I don't know if I got to get this in the picture. There's one guy at the dumb end of the bell curve, and he's like, Pat Mahomes goes burr. And then and then there's like a middle peak where the guy's like, well, actually like fumble luck by analytics is actually totally, random. And there's no way you can scout these things and blah, 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 DVOA, EPA, blah, blah, blah. And then and then it goes back down, and like the smart guy on the other end of the curve is like, Pat Mahomes goes burr.
Yeah,
like,
that's all it is.
That's the whole thing.
See, I'm curious about Detroit, man. That's must have been a great time. Was it your first time covering the draft in person? What was the vibe out there? What's Detroit like? Is there good food to get out there? I've never been to Detroit. What's it like out there?
I actually low key love Detroit, and I'm sure that's
Okay.
because like when I go downtown. Like
Okay.
when I covered the Nats, I covered a couple Tigers series out there. So like I've been around Detroit plenty of times, probably, and the Commanders have played there twice.
Okay.
So I love the city. I love Detroit style pizza. I'm all in on what the city has to offer. For the draft specifically, it was my first draft, and I would say that there was really good access. On Wednesday, they had a charity event with Special Olympics, basically a football camp.
Yeah, I saw that.
Jayden did like 30 minutes of media after that. And I tell you what, man, like he just did a lot of media, period. I mean, this is a guy who did the red carpet before the draft, which was, I think, 20, 25 minutes on the red carpet where he's talking to people. And then after the draft, I'm standing in the media room, and I did not anticipate like how much they put these guys through. And Caleb Williams was like on another level. Like Jayden got picked obviously 10 minutes after him, and Jayden and I want to say at least one other guy, maybe two, were like through the NFL media car wash before Caleb even was. Well, basically what they do is they take these guys into a room full of like brand partners. So it's like if Tide wants to like have you on their TikTok or whatever, you do like 2 seconds or whatever. So I mean, Jayden probably spent after the draft like 90 minutes talking to media. And after like some of the brand partners, he did local TV, print, me, podcast. And I went last after like 90 minutes, after about 30 other like interviews about, people putting the mic in his face and saying, when did you know? Or what did you think of Topgolf? Or blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of the same questions. And I got to tell you, like I asked Jayden, I was like, what was that? Like, what is this like? He's like, it's the biggest night of your life. And you're just like doing the same thing over and over again. He's like, man, I'm blessed to be in this position. He gave me like the same exact, like he was just like.
I heard he's California cool. That's what he is. That's what I've got from him.
Yeah, right. He's like, he was totally cool, calm, collected, never rushed. And so I was actually talking to Sheehan about this, and Sheehan was like, yeah, like because I was saying I was impressed by his demeanor. And Sheehan was like, yeah, I guess I wasn't around, but I guess RG3 had some same mannerisms, same, calm, cool collectedness. And so it's obviously a great starting point, but it's not necessarily indicative of how his NFL career will go.
Makes sense.
Sam, it sounds like it was JJ and not May in the end. What can you tell us about what went into the final thought process there? I think most thought it was the other two, right? I think most people thought it was May and Daniels battling it out for that last spot. Sounds like that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, so JJ was number 2 on their board behind Jayden and ahead of Drake. And I think that when you look at JJ, there's just a lot of things that NFL people love, right? Like his ability to execute an offense. He can move, he can move a little bit. He does have arm strength. There's a lot there. I think projecting quarterbacks is really hard, right? No, it's always an inexact science despite the time and the resources poured into it. And JJ, I think, is a perfect example because he was asked to do so little. And so obviously, like their scouting department said, when we project this guy, we believe, that he has a higher hit rate, or we think he will be better in the league given all of the black box variables that are hard to predict in terms of coaching and scheme and injury and mechanics and things like that. Like they just probably thought he was a better position player to succeed in the NFL.
Were you surprised? I know you were. We were both on that media hit with Daniel Jeremiah where he said he's known Adam Peters for a long time, and essentially he thought he would be a Drake May guy. So I guess I'm surprised that there was such a disconnect there.
Yeah, and I mean, there were some anonymous sources who told Tom Pelissero at some point that because they know Adam Peters, they thought he would be a J.J. McCarthy guy, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of different people who interpret, who have different experiences of these executives and say, oh, well, I remember that guy liked this thing about this guy. That means he must be a Drake guy or a J.J. guy. That being said, Daniel Jeremiah is obviously one of the best in the game at what he does. And so when he says he expects him to be a Drake May guy, you take that seriously. And to me, I wonder how much of this decision, and I don't think we would get if we gave Adam Peters truth serum, how much of this is when you are trying to rebuild a franchise in this manner, how much is the high floor important to you? Because I think that Drake May is a project, and even though, there's a lot of mechanical things you gotta work through with him. So even though he has a higher ceiling, a superstar ceiling potentially, you got to wonder like, where is he? What's the likelihood that hits? And so I think that there's a comfort level in taking a more certain product. You know what I mean?
It's not like your sources, like you maintain relationships and friendships in the league. That's what the business that you're in is built on. How does it change when there's so many new people in the building? Like, I'm sure some of these folk you know from other places, but a lot of new faces. How do you start building those relationships, Sam?
To me, I think that like the way that you build strong relationships is to show genuine curiosity, to be meaningfully engaged and not transactional. I know that like some reporters probably have different methods, and I've read like plenty of profiles of Shams Charania, and he's like blowing dudes up with like 20 texts an hour, and I think that like it's hard for me as a guy. Right? It's hard for me as a guy to look at Shams and be like, well, it didn't work. Like he's not successful. Like he very clearly is. But that's a style I think that for him, works. And I'm a different kind of guy. Like I would feel bad doing that. And so like I just got to be true to myself and authentic, right? And so like there's a reason why, I have a natural interest in the stadium. I have a natural interest in like how that, how politics and business and sports intersect. And so it's easy for me, like in my off time, it doesn't really feel like work when I'm reading about these things. And like when I'm learning about, okay, this is why it's so important to the Commanders fan base to get back to RFK. And so like, then I ask questions that are informed. And I think that, for people who want to engage, I think that it's easier to explain something to someone who's genuinely curious rather than me just being like, hey, I'm trying to throw the word breaking and source on Twitter. Like, can you just give me information? Like that's not really my bag. And so I think that goes a long way towards source building in my opinion. And that's like across sports, that's across industries. That's like just a journalism thing, I think.
100%. I get that from you. I get that from John Keim as well. He's really big about building relationships, which I do appreciate. That being said, I'm a local. I'm a season ticket holder. I go to the games. Do you have any inclination? Do you have any idea where what's going to happen, or how far along are we? Are we anywhere close to finding the stadium by any means? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's too early to say. It's a difficult question, but like the question to me is, does the RFK bill get passed this year? Because if you don't, that's a massive setback. And because it's an election year, Congress, the Senate, where the bill is right now, the Senate is really not going to be able to pass legislation from late June through the election. There's like a little pocket there in September. But other than that, like it's going to be very difficult. So, I mean, the RFK bill is something that you're going to want to get done sooner rather than later. And I think the new ownership group knows that if this legislation doesn't pass, DC cannot be at the negotiating table to actively be competing with Maryland. I think that at this point, it would take something drastic for Virginia to be in play, particularly after the monumental deal.
Exactly.
But I mean, right now to me, it's a 2-jurisdiction race, but DC isn't at the table yet, and they have to. And I don't know about you guys. Anytime you're betting on Congress to do something in a timely and manner, it's always a dicey play.
100%.
Sam, what do they do with all that real estate that they have out in Ashburn? I mean, valuable property, right? They're gonna sell that off and then put the practice stadium wherever they end up at. I mean, I know we're looking far into the future, but I'm just thinking about how they've got to be sitting there looking at dollar signs on that land out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, people call it Main, like Main Street of the internet, right? With all the data centers out there. And so it's very valuable land. But at the same time, I think you have to pick where your new stadium is going to be first, because if you end up going to DC, do you want to say, hey, PG County, like we're going to put our practice facility at the old Landover site. We already own that land. We can profit. But then if you keep your stadium and you do build FedEx 2, do you want to say, okay, DC, we can't build the stadium there, but we want to like have a meaningful presence in DC. We'll put the practice facility there. So I think there's just like, I like, to me, the stadium is the domino, and then the practice facility will follow that.
But it won't stay there, you don't think?
I mean, it's possible for sure. I mean, Loudoun County, I know that like that's an important community partner for the team. Virginia is a big fan base. I think having A
Yep.
strategic outpost there is important. So it's too early to tell.
So, Sam, I'm just kind of curious of your thoughts about the draft. So, I read your article leading up to the draft. You had the 5 biggest needs for Washington going in. Offensive tackle was the very first one, cornerback, edge, tight end, wide receiver. It seems like offensive tackle was neglected. Edge, we kind of have like power in the numbers, but not necessarily a high-end guy. What are your thoughts on the draft? Where do you think are next steps for the team? Do you think they're going to approach anybody for a free agency, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so to me, like, this draft was Adam Peters not being able to fix everything year, and also not being under pressure. Oops, sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. We lost for 1 second. You got it.
I was gonna say it jumped for a second. I mean, I wrote this. Like, my takeaway from the draft is Adam Peters didn't fix everything, and he wasn't under pressure to try. Like, I think that in years past, the GM or the head coach of the team has been, accountable to ownership, and ownership is saying, like, you got to fix this, you got to make a splash. And so Adam Peters said, hey, like, I think Johnny Newton in the second round is a perfect example of that. Yeah, okay, they don't need defensive tackle right now, but Adam Peters is not thinking, how can I maximize the Commanders' win total in 2024? He's thinking about, how can I build the best sustainable team over a period of time? And so I'm not saying Daron Payne or John Allen are, like, going to be gone or they're going to fall off, but Adam Peters is saying, okay, this guy is clearly the best football player on our board. That is going to strengthen our team. And he's not thinking, oh, I have to get a left tackle right now, because, they like the Georgia kid, but to go up and he was picked 18 by Cincinnati, like, like, if you then go up, then you're sacrificing draft picks in the future. And so to me, this is just saying, like, look, like, this is going to take a while. Like, the Commanders are probably not going to be very good this year. Like, sports books have them at 6.5 wins. Like, too early to tell, but I mean, yeah, like, would a veteran free agent be in play? A Hubbard, a Humphreys, Pete, I think is another name out there.
Yeah, I saw Pete out there too.
Yeah, like, I mean, all those guys would be in play. But to me, the success of the offense this year is kind of hinges on you operating in the negative space that Bieniemy was in, right? Like, you need to have the play calling and the personnel and, like, the scheme match up. You need to be able to accentuate, hey, we can't true drop back pass a ton because we don't have the offensive line to do it. So we need to use more quick game, or we need to, like, roll Jayden out and take advantage of his mobility. Like, the pieces have to be put together in the right way for this to succeed. And I think Adam is betting that the coaching staff can translate the pieces he was able to.
I can see that. Situational.
How close did they actually come to trading back up into the first round?
My sense is that they made some calls, but when the run on tackle started, like, the price just wasn't, like, I don't think it was them, like, getting super close and then being like, like, we just got to hold ourselves back. I think that they kind of knew.
Yeah. And I think the league knew that run was going to happen there. I think that's why so many people thought beforehand maybe that would be an option to them. So we asked this almost to every guest because I think it's important and I think it's interesting. You got 3 highly successful offensive minds in the building. Each one kind of does something different that maybe maximizes what another guy doesn't do well. Cliff Kingsbury notoriously didn't do well marrying the play action. I can't think of anybody that probably does it better than Anthony Lynn. What do you think the offense will look like?
What do the other guests say?
That would be cheating.
That's a good answer, Doug. I like that.
I mean, to me, this is going to be an offense that Cliff's going to run. So you're going to take downfield shots. You're going to spread it out. You're going to be in gun a ton. I think that, obviously, as you pointed out, Anthony Lynn's job, I think his primary thing is going to be how well do you marry the run and the pass? Like, how well do you have these play action concepts? And I do think also that Cliff is going to be better at just being an offensive guy than.
We hear that a ton, for sure.
Yeah.
And, like, okay, something that maybe I can add that's a little bit different. I just don't want to give your viewers, like, the same rehash. Something that can be a little bit different is I actually spent a week in Lubbock, Texas in 2017 when Cliff was the head coach there for a story I did for The Ringer. It was actually about college football team chaplains in the South. I ended up writing about Cliff because I thought he was pretty. Have you guys heard this story before? Have I told it before?
No, I have not. I'll hear it.
Okay. So everybody told me that Cliff like showed up they were like first one in, last one out. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like they say, people say that about everybody. I was like, all right, so when does he get here? And they were like, oh, he gets here at 4 a.m. Like that dude's a grinder, grinds tape. I'm like, all right. So one day, like I just left my hotel at 3:45 and I got to the facility and I was sitting on the steps. It's like late July or August in West Texas, and it's hot. But Cliff at 4:01 pulled up in the white Escalade and he stepped out and he was like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "People said you just got here super early, so I had to like come figure it out." And he was like, "All right, weird." Like, like he was kind of like, "I think this is weird," but we went into the gym and I spent some time with him, and he worked out, and we went to his office, and he had like all these diagrams up on his board, right? And so like for him, getting the facility early, working out was like also it was time to himself where he could do his like be in his happy place, right? Which is like designing offensive football. And like all the other things were hard, like, managing, different personality conflicts or figuring out the schedule in terms of being a head coach. So I know that dude knows and loves offensive football. And I think that you're going to see, I would be surprised if this year the concepts got stale and they declined in the second half of the season, like Cliff has, in the decade he was a head coach. So that is one experience like 7 years ago, but it's really stuck with me in the sense that I think it really like shined a light on like who Cliff is and what he's about. And so the thing, if I can keep rambling a little bit more, the thing you got to avoid is what happened last year in Carolina, right? Where you brought a bunch of smart offensive guys in, and there was a lot of infighting, and it ultimately led to the team being ineffective. And so I think that's where Dan Quinn and ownership come in, is they're going to there's going to be disagreement at points where Cliff and Anthony and Brian see things a different way. And it's up to Dan to manage that. And it's up to Josh to support Dan in the way that he manages it. Because you can't have happen to Jayden Daniels what happened to Bryce Young last year.
Gotcha. No doubt. Are they going to be using this VR? So we hear nothing but VR stuff with Daniels. Will that be something that the team implements with him?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's either done or it's going to be done. Like Cognalize is the German company that makes the VR that Jayden uses. And so my understanding is like it's definitely in the plans, because obviously Jayden talked a lot about it and getting 200 extra reps a week. And when you have a franchise quarterback,
invest.
VR is a small investment.
Sam, do you have any idea how much it costs? How much does that the VR system cost by any means? Is it thousands, 100,000? I have no idea.
I am not sure. It cannot be. I mean, maybe it can be 100,000.
Like maybe 10,000. I have no idea. I don't know what it entails. Like I can imagine like an Oculus kind of looking through something, kind of seeing the stadium. I can't imagine much more than that. That's all.
It's funny to me because like I remember when I was at Lubbock, right? Like Patrick Mahomes had just left. I had done a story on Pat Mahomes in 2016, and like Pat Mahomes was talking about how important VR was to him and getting extra reps, and that was important when he was a backup year in Kansas City. So it's like it's a little funny to me that Jayden has become the poster child of this, because it's like it's not necessarily a super new thing. Like teams have been doing it for a while. I'm sure that the VR quality is better in 2023 than it was in 2016. But it's certainly not a new concept for quarterbacks.
Yeah, I got that as well.
I didn't realize that.
So obviously the draft was pretty hectic for you. You have a couple of days to kind of decompress. Coming up, we have OTAs, rookie mini camps. Can you kind of like peel back the curtain on that? Like, what do you look for when you go to camp? Is it kind of more of a glorified practice? We're just kind of walking around and putting an install. Like, what's going on in OTAs? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like I did my first pro days this year, right? Where I was in Chapel Hill and I was in Baton Rouge. And I know they say the pro days are super important, but like the whole contingent got there right before the throwing session, which everyone says doesn't matter, and then they left right after it. So pro days and minicamp to me are like kind of, well, I will say rookie minicamp to me is not important. Like to me, it's like, like you see Jayden in his jersey for the first time and he throws a little bit and he starts like planting the seeds for like relationships that they need. Like these are the most important players of the Adam Peters era, right? Is like setting the foundation and hitting on 4 of these guys or whatever. The pro days, the OTAs are important just in the sense that like you're ramping up and you're trying to get things installed and you're trying to set the foundation for like, okay, to your guys' point, like this is what the offense is going to look like this year. This is how we built it around you, and ramping up to the mandatory minicamp, I think is important because obviously health is the number one concern coming out of that. And number two is like, is everyone on the same page and do they understand what we're going to be asking of them? And are the coaches, streamlining these processes and basically like getting a dry run in before training camp. Like, I think that is important. But in terms of like I just know that like the thing that's going to pop on Twitter, like from rookie minicamp is like, Jayden's either going to throw like a really impressive deep ball or he's going to like miss Luke McCaffrey on a dig, and people are gonna be like, "Oh my god!" Like, or they're gonna be like, "Yes, he's the man!" And like, both of those reactions would be wrong.
This is where we miss Pete Haley, because Pete Haley's my guy. I love Pete Haley. He'd always record the videos super slow mo and really make it epic, and it'll just go viral on Twitter. It's hilarious. So it's funny.
Peter Haley is very good at Twitter and tried to coach me for a while, and I think he made a little bit of progress, but I'm a lost cause.
That's funny. It's my guy.
We've been asking the other thing we kind of ask about, because I'm curious about it defensively, and it feels like the answer we get has been 4 out of the last 5 years saying, "Wait, it can't get any worse," right? We're asking about the defense, and I because like guys that I think the fan base will probably hire on, both the corners, like how much of a bump are these guys going to get simply from having Witt and Quinn and those guys in the building?
Are you talking about the defense as a unit or those specific players?
Well, I mean, I think as a unit, they all get better. Communication couldn't get worse, but I guess specifically those are some players that I think probably get the biggest bump, or at least needed the biggest bump, and just a change of direction.
So my take, which might be a little spicy, is that I think the defense will obviously benefit from having new leadership and new coaching, particularly in the secondary. But I actually think that the biggest benefit for the defense going from last year to this year will be the offense. Like, if you don't have, like, if you're like, they played horrible situational football, and like when Eric Bieniemy would go out and call 3 straight pass plays and you're back on the field after a long drive, like in 50 seconds, like it's really hard to answer the bell like every single time. And I think, especially, when you trade away your 2 top pass rushers, and we can debate, like, were they effective even with Chase and Montez or whatever. But I just think having a unit and having a head coach who's going to demand complimentary football and say, like, hey, like if the defense just had a long drive, Cliff, like, can we mix in a run, like, just to make sure that we, like, burn some clock and like, help field position? Like, they're going to be thinking about each other, and they're not going to be siloed in the same way. And so I think the defense can't help but benefit from that. And so, switching back to the specific players, like Benjamin St. Juste is a tall, long corner for a guy who has had a lot of success with tall, long corners. And I think that they're going to have more talent, particularly in the secondary. They're going to have better coaching. And I think that you're going to have a guy with a cohesive plan, and he's going to communicate to players what they need to do in a clearer way than I think it was last year. And so anytime you have that, like that's going to be huge. But I think the big question mark for me is Emmanuel Forbes is an outlier body type to begin with. If you're going to be more aggressive, I think they're probably going to generate pressure more with blitzing. And I think they're going to have like multiple fronts, especially with the linebackers that they have. If you play more single high, if you play more press man coverage, is Emmanuel Forbes going to be able to do that? Like, I don't know. I have some serious doubts. So like, what is his future? I think it's like completely up in the air.
I hadn't planned on asking this, but you mentioned him. How did it go so spectacularly wrong with EB last year?
I think that there's a lot of different ways that you could talk about. I mean, Nikki Javala and I wrote a whole article, with talking to a lot of people in the building. EB declined to comment, but basically, I mean, like players felt like he felt it was his way or the highway, and he felt like the scheme is the most important thing, and we're going to run this scheme, and this is how it's going to go, and we're going to pass the ball because that's the way, you pass to get the lead and you run to protect it. And so when we're down, we're just going to call a bunch of passes. And I think that particularly with the offensive line that they had and the game situations that they were in, you put Sam Howell in a difficult situation. And I think that a lot of players also lay blame, need to change. Like, this is not acceptable.
Right.
And so there's obviously a lot of finger pointing when you go 4-13. And it goes the way that it did. and certainly EB would feel differently. But like, if you go read the article Nikki and I did, like that really lays out the case of how it went so wrong.
You like the over under for that 6.5 wins, Sam?
It's I'm just like laughing because like every year I'm like, I get too close to it and I'm like, oh yeah, like all these pieces make sense. I've thought way too much about this, like, and I haven't zoomed out and been like, oh, like there's a lot of ways this could also go wrong. I mean, and when you look at the schedule, it's like really hard to know like who's going to be good. Like every year in the league, right? Like every year, some team goes from last to first in their division. Is Washington going to be that team? Like I have serious doubts, but will they get over 7 wins? Like, I don't know. I think 6.5 is kind of the right number.
That's why they do it. They're good about that, right?
Right. Exactly. This is why I don't sports gamble at all. I like stick to the poker table where I feel like I know a little bit more.
Yeah, control a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel it's May 3rd. I'm allowed to punt. I'm allowed to say I don't know. So come back to me in training camp.
Fair enough.
I got one more for you, Sam. So going into OTAs, going into summer, is there a particular position group that you're really interested that you're watching, and potentially, obviously, we have a new regime as well. Is there going to be like a numbers crunch, a pinch that you maybe are watching as well?
I don't want to keep talking about the defensive backs because I feel, but even though that's like the position I'm most interested in,
who's going to play strong safety?
I would imagine Defo. I mean,
or Chin, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Defo or Chin, or and then you have
Quan.
Quan could be it. I mean, because to me, like Percy is fast, and I think that like even though he had some tough moments last year, especially with like angles in the secondary, like I think that in an ideal world, like you would love for him to be your free safety, and Defo I think would be a good strong, but like all of that's going to get figured out. To me, the thing that I'm most curious about maybe is the receiver room, because Cliff in Arizona, even though it declined every year, he loved 10 personnel, right? Like some true air raid. And I just don't think they have the personnel to go 10. And so let's say, and Jahan Dotson, obviously, even though he has promise, I think that locally people are much higher on him than they are nationally. And I think that that's a guy who needs to bounce back from a disappointing year. And without, Curtis, what does that look like for Terry and Jahan? Luke McCaffrey, Diami's going into the last year of his deal. I think those are like the 4 guys that you really got to pay attention. And I know that they have Crowder and Zacchaeus, but like I think those are the 4 guys where you say, okay, how do we win with these guys? And how exactly do we utilize them? And so I'm curious about this receiver room because I think they are going to pass a lot, and the tight end room is improved. And I almost said them because I'm curious if Sanat can truly be like a use check type role. That would be
awesome. Yeah.
Like that would be
fun.
That would be massive, man.
Yeah.
But I would say the receiver room is something that I'm interested in how they shake out.
Sam, we appreciate it, man. You've been grinding. You got to take a couple of weeks off. What does it look like between now and whenever the rookie minicamp is? A couple of weeks.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna be doing some research on the new guys. I've been, watching film and just getting ready for focusing on ball. It's weird at this time of year, and I'm gonna be focused on the stadium stuff too, right? Because I said like they want to get this thing, they need to get this thing past the Senate by late June, preferably. They could still do it by the end of the year, but late June would be a huge marker for them. So I'll be watching film. I'll be watching the Senate. The normal football.
Some more DC thing out here. Okay, perfect.
Exactly.
Whose film gets turned on first?
I watched a lot of Johnny Newton right after they picked him, and
he's a stud.
Like, he's a stud, man. And like just the, I hate to like fall into the football speak of like a football coach, but like the way he arrives violently is like it's impressive. And I watched, I've watched some of the Michigan corner. I think the next guy for me is going to be Sanat, just because like I wrote about Kyle Juszczyk during the playoffs and how he really is a unicorn of like what he does as a fullback. And he said, I asked him like, I was in San Francisco and I was like, if you were to replace yourself, like how would you do it? And he's like, first off, I'm not going to do that. I'm playing until I'm 45. But 2, I would draft a tight end. Like I would draft a fluid mover tight end who could like line up in the backfield. And that's what Adam Peters did, man. So I'm gonna shoot him a text, see what he thinks, and we'll figure it out.
awesome,
Sheehan was on Friday, and I told him I thought Snot looked a lot like Cooley, and he said, "Yeah, I told Cooley that was my comp if Cooley had actually tried." Sam, you're the best, man. We appreciate you.
All right, Sam.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, see you.